All right, here we go. Let's check the source here. All righty. Luke chapter 9.
Are we still finishing up 8?
On chapter 8, excuse me. And we talked about Jairus, right? The daughter. Did we talk about Jairus? I have us at 40, but
Yeah, so I brought him up early
oh, okay.
because I was talking about how like this whole chapter has to do with listening and hearing and obeying. So that's why he came up last week.
Okay. Well, I'm in the wrong chapter. 8. It's all a blur. Okay, let's go ahead and do that then. Let's talk about, so we're in the middle of this ambling around of Jesus. That statement in Matthew before that leads into what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus went about all Galilee preaching in their synagogues, the gospel of the kingdom is however it's said. But the went about part always interested me, that when God finally incarnates, becomes a man in the councils of eternity, he just goes about when he gets here. I've always thought that was interesting, and then a lot of times the most interesting stuff that happens when people come to him. So sometimes he initiates, like he did with the woman's son, that the widow's son who died, it was their only son. He saw that and initiated, but now you're going to have the reverse of that with this high status person, Jairus, who's going to approach him like the centurion did. So earlier on, a centurion approached him for the healing of his servant. And now Jairus, who has status among Jews, approaches him for the healing of his daughter. So let's do 40 through let's do the whole thing. We're gonna do the whole thing. 40 through whatever it is, 56 or so.
And as Jesus returned, the people welcomed him, for they had all been waiting. There came a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue, and fell at Jesus' feet and began to implore him to come to his house. They had an only daughter, about 12 years old, and she was dying. But her crowd were pressing against her. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and could not be healed by anyone came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. And Jesus said, "Who is the one who touched me?" And while they were all denying it, Peter said, "Master, people are crowding and pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had gone out of me." When the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell down before him and declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." While he was still speaking, someone came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, "Your daughter has died. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But when Jesus heard this, he answered him, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe and she'll be made well." When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the girl's father and mother. Now they were all weeping and lamenting for her, but he said, "Stop weeping, for she has not died, she is asleep." And they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. He, however, took her by the hand and called, saying, "Child, arise." Her spirit returned, and she got up immediately. And he gave orders for something to be given to her to eat. Her parents were amazed, but he instructed them to tell no one what had happened.
So that is 17 verses. And I should have done these counts. I do a lot of counts, but it appears to me that the woman who just invades the story. So think of the similarities there. This is just occurring to me, so I have to think about it. But think of the similarities here between this and the story of the woman that invaded the dinner at the Pharisee's house. This person of low status invades the dinner and basically contaminates it, and everybody's shocked about it. And then after that, this high status person, Jairus, ruler of the synagogue, and official of the synagogue, has a daughter, and so he needs to heal her. And here comes this woman again, this unclean woman invading the procession, and in both cases, the story in many ways is really about that. It's really about this invasion of uncleanness and the transfer, the transfer then of cleanness from Jesus to the person. And they have that all in common. And I'm thinking through this, as I'm talking, but there's a lot of parallels there. It's probably worth thinking about in terms of what Luke is doing. Luke, the Gentile, who notices these things about social status and the overturning of social custom, social class, the caste system, and so forth. But it's just anybody, I suppose anybody who, if anybody from the first century was reading the story, that's the sort of stuff that they would notice, much more than we would. That's an interesting thought. If you take somebody worlds apart, cultures apart, read the same story, what are the things that jump out at them? And they'd be very different from the things that jump out at us. So if you're going to do a sermon on this, a lot of people will do the sermon on the healing, and the healings are important, but the undertones, what's between the lines, not even between the lines, but what's going on with this woman, and the fact that Jesus, he's on his way. I'm not sure Jairus ever says anything. I don't think he ever says anything. There's no conversation between Jesus and Jairus, but the woman does. So Luke doesn't report any words between Jesus and Jairus, but he records the conversation between. He's very interested in what Jesus said about the woman and to the woman, and he records that at length. So, remembering that this is a guy, Luke, maybe a Roman, I don't know, but certainly writing to a Roman, Theophilus, Roman official, at least at the time of the writing of this book, when he delivered this book to Theophilus. If you think of the intro to Luke as the last thing written, so you do all your research, you do all your thing, then you start writing. Maybe the intro was the last thing written because you're writing as you go. I don't know, but he's writing to a high status person, and he doesn't bother with Jairus. He bothers with this woman. He did bother with the centurion. He's very interested but from the Jewish standpoint, the centurion is unclean. So he spends a lot of time on that narrative. Spends a lot of time on the woman with the son that died. Spends a lot of time on this woman who interrupts the story. At the beginning of the story, she plays no part. She's not in the story, and she just appears to break up, to make a mess of it, so to speak, for the people that are there. And so when she shows up, you got to imagine the synagogue official. They all stop, and his daughter is dying. And Jesus just stops and spends however long with this woman, and time is of the essence. The daughter, we know by the story, has already died. And so the official of the synagogue what is he thinking? Is he thinking, oh, go ahead, Jesus, take as much time as you need with this woman? Or is he trying to figure out, how to get this thing moving? And why is he spending so much time with this nobody? And we don't get any answers to that. Luke doesn't care about that, but he does care about the fact that another low status woman invades the thing with a high status person there. And Jesus is interested in that first and foremost. And so she touches him, and instead of her uncleanness transferring to him, like a contagion, his cleanness, so to speak, transfers to her, and she is healed. And then I'm really stepping, let me look at my notes here, see what I'm missing. No, let's just keep going. Finish the woman's part of the story. And so you get to the end of it. He insists, why does he insist, right? I mean, in 46 there, 45, who touched me? And, they don't understand. There's people I don't know what kind of chaotic situation this is, but he insists on knowing, I want to see this person. So if you're her, you're low status in the first place. What are they going to do? That's a desperation. That's an act. That's a desperate act. But, he's a at least a locally famous rabbi, teacher. And is that what Peter says? Master. He calls Jesus master. So that's the kind of stature he has. Then you got this synagogue official But he wants to confront or something, this woman. And so and we don't know why. And I have my opinion, you know, I read commentaries, they have their opinions. But he insists on talking to this woman. So she finally comes up, terrified, you know, begs for mercy or something, I don't know, falls down in verse 47. And then there's this little phrase. So she declares in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately here. So there's testifying to what she was and what she is now. And then he, in the presence of all the people, says, daughter, he calls her, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. And so in the presence of all the people, he essentially declares her clean. And so there's this reconciliation, if you will, this welcome back into society. Because she was a cast out prior to this. And so is that the reason that he wanted her? He was going above and beyond what she wanted. She wanted healing. And he said, you know, there's more at stake here. There's another problem here, and that is you're an outcast. You're an outcast among the people. You're a daughter of God. You're a daughter of the people among the people. And I'm going to do this in such a way that you are welcome back into the life of the community, into the people of God. That's what I think is going on here. But he's thinking about these things at many levels, all while Jairus is just waiting, wondering what's going to happen to his daughter.
It's interesting because it's almost like the way Jesus is talking is like the healing was what's the word? Like it didn't happen consciously. It's not like he did something, she did something. You know what I mean? He's like, I felt the power go out of me, like as if he is, you know, not
Well,
consciously controlling it.
And then the demonstration of faith parallel to the centurions. She believes if I just touch his garment, I will be healed. Well, that's a remarkable insight into who this person is. I don't know, she'd been walking around watching him, afraid to approach him, because women like that don't approach somebody like him. You know, so it's just interesting in many, many different levels.
It kind of is really interesting because, like, at least with the other guy, he like, you know, he says, "You are the one with authority. Whatever you say will be done." And all she is concerned about is just like touching him, like he's some sort of, you know.
Yeah, we don't know what
Yeah.
was it, like a magic.
Yeah. Right. How
he
she
doesn't
thinks of him, and yeah.
he doesn't care about any of that.
Yeah.
While he sees his faith. So you have you have the woman invading the Pharisees' dinner, then you have the woman with the dead son. So that woman touches Jesus. Jesus touches at least the coffin and maybe the body. Now she touches him. So that's 3 ritual defilement stories. And now we're going to move on to the resurrection of this little girl that he's going to touch. And it's very, very explicit that happened. And I think it's passed over a lot because we don't see the significance of it.
I also think too, I just think it's really, I don't have anything to say about it, but the fact that like the first words down and she's like trembling.
Yep.
She has to announce what she did to everybody. Right? Like
He's going to make her do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That has to be like so.
So she starts.
Humiliating her in a way. You
Yep.
know what I mean?
She
But
starts out.
again,
She starts out in the, in a sort of mindset of public shame.
Yeah.
But it ends with this
Yeah.
remarkable statement, your faith has made you well.
Right.
Where he praises her faith like he praised the faith of the
Right.
centurion.
Right, because also anybody who knows her in the crowd at this point still sees her as
Yep.
the social pariah for
That's right.
12 years.
Which is why it's important that he pause for a moment and announce the healing, the cleansing, so that she can be given back to to the society.
But then anyone who doesn't know her, she has to tell them like this horrible thing that she's just done. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, there's probably such a hubbub when she was
Yeah.
saying what she had done.
yeah,
And Peter's not wrong. I mean, all those other people, all these people had aches and pains, right? I mean, this is the first century. So they're all dealing with, you don't have doctors that go fix everything that goes wrong, right? I'm on Wednesday, I'm gonna, I gotta get an implant fixed because of a poorly done crown behind it. And, there's bone loss, so he's gonna take the crown off and rebuild the bone. And he's gonna sedate me to do all that. I go, okay. And then I'm gonna go in on Wednesday and I'm gonna get all this done. And it's gonna take 4 months to rebuild the bone. And they're gonna put another crown on. There's be very little pain. And I'm gonna be on my way. And we just, we don't think anything of that. But if you have that kind of problem 2,000 years ago,
Right.
you just have toothaches all the time.
And
Really
one of the
severe
things
ones.
that makes me cringe is felt like black.
Yep. Yeah, if you got an infected tooth prior to some time, you just died. Because that infection traveled up into your sinuses. Now you just take, like I'm gonna do, at least I'm gonna take it for as little as I possibly can. You take an antibiotic. I had this happen. Yeah, that too. But I took an antibiotic in 2012 or so when it was on a Friday. He couldn't get to me until Monday. So this infection, I could feel it moving up. And I thought, I'm not gonna make it till Monday. So he gave me penicillin. And it took about 24 hours, but all of a sudden, you could feel that stuff come back down until he could get into it on Monday and clean it all out. It's, hey, Joe.
Welcome.
Okay. So that's the story. Oh, one little insight. She's had this experience. She's had this malady for 12 years. So the daughter is 12 years old. And this woman has suffered this way the entire life of the daughter, 12 years. These kind of things oftentimes in these stories tie elements of the story and other stories together. And that's an example of one. So Luke interrupts this. He does this a lot. He'll interrupt the story to go someplace else and then he'll come back to the story. And why did you construct it that way? Well, I mean, in this sense, chronologically, it happens this way, right? He sets out to go to the Jairus's house and he gets interrupted. So that's when Luke tells the story. But at other times, I think it's going to happen here shortly. Again, he just stops telling one story. Oh, it's coming up in the next chapter when Jesus sends them on their tour to preach the kingdom and heal. And then before he has them come back and tell what happened, he tells another story in between. And then he comes back to the disciples. So, just the way he did things. Okay. Now we're on to Jairus's daughter. Let's see. That's enough of that. Okay, so now he gets there. And so none of them, he says, no, she's not died, but is asleep. Meaning she's going to wake up in a minute. They all began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. There's no question that she died. Jairus still never says anything, or her mother. He took her by the hand. He's very deliberate about that. So this dead girl takes her by the hand, ritually unclean, says, "Child, arise, her spirit returned." So there's Luke saying she was dead. She got up immediately, he gave orders for something to be given her to eat, and on we go. So, there it is again. It's another girl. So these stories of females, right? Let's go through them. There's the woman at the Pharisee's house. There's the woman who's only son died. There's the woman with the hemorrhage just now, and now there's the little girl. And this is a Luke thing. He has a lot of stories about women in his both volumes. He's the one who's going to talk about, not only does he talk about Aquila and Priscilla, he will sometimes, I think, reverse the names. And it'll be Aquila and Priscilla, which is noteworthy. Well, I'm sorry, Priscilla's the female. So he'll reverse it and Priscilla will be first. Okay, commonalities between these two miracle stories that are woven together. In both cases, let's see, verse 47 and verse 41. Where's verse 41? Jairus came and fell at Jesus' feet in 41, and in 47, the woman came up and fell at Jesus' feet. Let's see, you got a daughter, 42, 48, and 49. So let's go through that. The girl was the only daughter. And then Jesus calls her daughter, I believe, in 47.
48.
Wherever it is. Where's that? Daughter, 48, yeah. 48, and then 49. Why do I got 49? Your daughter has died. So it's just
Yeah.
very personal.
While he was still speaking, somebody is saying those exact words. Like I imagine he's Jairus, he's feeling impatient. I mean, this is maybe me reading too much into it, but like putting myself in his shoes, I'd be feeling impatient. I'd be like bouncing back and forth, wanting to get to my daughter. Suddenly you're seeing this miracle happen. You're recognizing why Jesus stopped what's happening, and you're starting to feel this hope of like, wow, he just saved this woman. Like, we're headed to my house, and then immediately your daughter's died. Stop bothering me.
Or he's a little resentful that.
Right, but I mean, I think that there's
Yeah.
probably a lot of
Yeah.
different reasons, right? You're watching for a miracle. You're asking him to come to a miracle. He's on his way to your house.
Right.
So I'm sure there's like resentment, but also like this can actually happen. And then as Jesus is finishing that miracle, you're hearing your daughter said, "Stop bothering the teacher."
Right.
Like there's no point. You just imagine the devastation.
The desperation of the circumstances of both the immediacy of the healing. The woman with the hemorrhage, immediately he touches the girl immediately. Think about the magnitude from one perspective. Think about the difference in the contrast of magnitude. He heals the woman with a hemorrhage, and then he raises the dead girl. But they are both treated in some sense as equivalent. There's in terms of stature, almost they're equivalent. The human wants to say the resurrection is a bigger deal, but from the vantage point of Luke, is Luke really treating the resurrection as if it's a bigger deal? He spends just as much time on the woman as he does on almost as he does on this.
Well,
In fact, he spends almost no time on the resurrection.
he's given both of these women their lives back, right?
Yes,
So she's a social pariah who can't do anything, who's suffering. And suddenly she socially and physically can partake again.
right.
And then this little girl is done. And now she has her life back. And can live and get married and
Yeah, I just find it interesting, the equivalency. And from Luke's perspective, the equivalency of the two miracles. To heal the woman without even knowing you're doing it. What just happened? That's just Jesus, practically. Hey, wait a minute, what just happened?
Passive. That's the word I was trying to say before. It was like a passive thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is
On his part.
roughly equivalent to raising this little girl from the dead. And that is the kingdom of God. These miracles, that's the going about. We'll get to it in the next chapter when we talk about their mission when they head out to preach the kingdom. Preach the kingdom and heal the sick. God is just casting out miracles he's going about. And with him goes about these miracles. These miracles go about too, and they just are being cast out to whoever happens to be there. Sometimes there's no deliberation with it. She just shows up and touches him and she's healed. He happens across the path of the woman with the dead son, and so he heals her. The synagogue official just happens to come by, so he takes off to heal the daughter. And they're just these miracles, are the signs of the kingdom are just everywhere as they're just going about with him, but in no particular with no particular itinerary. And I think that's part of the story. What are y'all looking befuddled about?
So is it like what you're saying is like with like the equality of miracles, it's like one is like somebody has an infirmity, the other one somebody's dead, but in the sense it's the same, in the sense that just like with salvation, like one person will, you know, be delivered from being like a heroin addict and a prostitute, and another person is delivered from some, you know, something far less viewed as far less worse, but in God's eyes, it's all equal.
Or we just think they're a good person.
Yeah.
They grew up in the father is a pastor and they've been a good person. And we think that's less of, we think this thing is a bigger deal. The drug addict thing is a
Right.
bigger deal than this. And from a certain perspective, it is. But, and from another perspective, it's not. It's the ways of God. They, you know,
Just like these miracles, basically.
it's just routine.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's just how the kingdom works. Righting the wrongs, you know, it's, you know, you just go back and look at it for a second again. What is it, Isaiah? Was it Isaiah 6?
Well, I mean, one wasn't as impossible to overcome than the other. It's like,
No, that's not it. 61. It's the favorable year of the Lord, right? I mean, that's what he quoted at the beginning of his ministry, and now he's doing it. He said what he's going to do. Now he's going to go do it. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to bring good news to the afflicted, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives. Now, how do you understand a captive? Well, I don't want to analogize too much, but I think we just saw one with the woman held in bondage to this for 12 years. That's almost Luke's language. So it's right in front of their eyes. He says it in the synagogue in Nazareth, and then he goes and does it in chapter 9. Comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting, so on and so forth. So that's just the nature of the inbreaking of the kingdom, that it brings with it good news, and not just the good news of salvation, but far more. There's a grand scope to it all, and it's all part of the plan of redemption. Affects body, soul, and spirit. You know,
It's also interesting that I don't really know if there's much to make out of this. But the woman is almost forced to declare the presence of all people what she had done. And then the daughter, her parents are told not to tell anybody what happened. And so like, I mean, I'm sure there's also like the social context of like, she was dead, right? She was dead, and dead people don't come back to life. She's unclean. So I don't know if there was anything with like that could make her a social pariah for the rest of her life, or if like it was just, I don't know.
I think he was trying to keep a lid on it. He's going to turn and go to Jerusalem later in this chapter, and later, I'm sorry, in chapter 9. He's going to set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he can't, you know, the word gets around that there's resurrections happening. It's hard to go about. So maybe it's just him trying to keep a lid on it.
He also randomly does that. I don't think it's necessarily happening in Luke, but in other gospels, like he'll heal a blind person and say, "Don't tell anybody what I've done," and then they'll go and tell everybody what he's done.
Every time. Yeah.
But it's just interesting because I've yet to like really find a correlation for when he tells somebody
Yeah, I know.
not to tell somebody.
Maybe what we consider the scope of the miracle.
Yeah.
He set everybody out. In this case, he set everybody out.
I also
Except the
wonder
parents.
too, because like the man who he heals from the demon possession in the hills, he's going out to tell everybody what Jesus has done for him.
And he
Whereas
tells them to.
Right, but I wonder if like if I were healed of some horrible illness, would my mindset be like, look at this great thing that the Lord has done? Or is it, look how great, like, I am now healed?
Right.
You know, like, I wonder if that's part of it too, like, what is their.
But he was
purpose?
very specific. Go tell what great things God has done for you.
Right.
So I am in the story because I have to tell what he did for me. These are also, in that side, they're Gentiles.
Right.
So go ahead and I'm leaving. I'm going back to Galilee. So go tell this prefiguring of Acts, maybe. I don't know, you got this Gentile spread of some kind of gospel there. And, you know, he's going back to Galilee. Here, I don't know. So you're right. Sometimes he tells them not to say anything, and sometimes he tells them to go say something. Go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifice that Moses required.
It feels like he's kind of prepping them for the notion that it's like, I don't, and I'm maybe reading into this too much, but he tells them, look, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. And then he's like, all right, everybody leave, and then he brings her back. So it's all, and then he tells them not to tell anybody. So is he
Like he's gonna let him think that she was just sleeping?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the idea there? or-
Yeah, I mean, except that, what are the parents gonna do? They're gonna really go out and say, yeah, she was just sleeping?
Right, of course.
And yeah, no, there's no, you know.
Yeah.
They're gonna say, no, what do you think, we're stupid? She's been laying there for a day and a half, or, you know.
So I would think it's interesting too, because I don't know if this is purposeful on his part, but when he records it, he says, comes to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him except for Peter, John, James, and his father and mother. Now they were all weeping and lamenting for her. He said, stop weeping, because he's not died but asleep. And they began laughing at him.
Right.
Who is they that are laughing?
That's a
at
good
him?
question.
Yeah, I always assumed
Right.
it was the people who were like the professional mourners or whatever, but
Yeah.
it seems like it's James
It
John.
kind of seems like, yeah.
James John.
I think, so he entered in with Peter, James, and John and James. Now they were all weeping and lamenting her. And they began, I gotta think that's the crowd.
That's how
I don't think Peter, at this point, I don't think Peter, especially with what Peter's gonna say soon. I don't think they're gonna laugh, but it's not outside the question. It's not out of the question, but
Yeah.
I
I can't imagine the parents would laugh at that. The child
No.
died.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah,
Sort of believe anyone else would there too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's slacking at it, you know.
so
I
there's,
always did think it was interesting though that he immediately directs them to give her something to eat, which that's what he does after he rises, right? He says, do you have anything for me to eat to like prove that he's not a ghost?
Yep. And also, Paul does it for the kid that fell out the window at Ephesus, or at Troas. Fell out, he bored him to death. Paul bored him to death and he fell out the window and died. And
And
then-
then he did.
and then Paul, you know,
Just continues teaching.
Paul's thinking, I knew I should have stopped early. And runs down and, yeah, and then he does the same thing. He ate something.
Paul's another old born rabbi.
More in common, you know, the touching 45, 46, 44, 45, 46, 47, 50, and 54. Very physical. Impurity, 43, 53, and 54. Ritual impurity, fear, 45, 47, 50, and faith, 48 and 50. So a lot in common. These stories are woven together with the way that they're told. Yeah, chronologically they're woven together because he sets out to go to the house and then this happens, interrupts it. But Luke weaves the stories together just simply by these kinds of elements, putting these kinds of elements in selection, how he tells the story. So it's, you know, it's the message of the kingdom, and the message of the kingdom includes this stuff in Isaiah 61. Second resurrection story in Luke, both involving females and both involving an only child. The first one was a nobody.
The woman's son, right?
Now, a commentator I read calls this Isaiah's festival of salvation. 61 that we were just looking at. Preaching of the good news manifested in release from captivity and healing. A lingering question on the minds of everyone about who Jesus really is. Who is this guy? It will be answered in 9:20. So that's what I got for chapter 8. We did a pretty good job of getting through that sequence. I talk about all this because I have 13 pages of notes for chapter 9. I highlighted the stuff I want to talk about. Okay. So now the apostles are going to come back into the picture as the apostles, the 12. So far, the apostles have fulfilled no unique or even productive function in the ministry of Jesus. They're there, and oftentimes they're foils. What's the matter with you on the water? What's the matter with you? You have little faith. And then the apostles are the disciples are the ones who say, who is this? Of all the people to say, who is this? It's the apostles, it's the disciples that say, who is this? And then a demon answers the question in the next story. 1 through 6.
Is it like the disciples are almost in a weird way, it's like they're blinded by his celebrity in some weird, like how like if somebody has celebrity, then like if somebody is like starstruck by them, then they do not understand the person as they actually are. They think of them in a different light than the actual person is. Is that like what they were experiencing with Jesus, and why they were so, in some ways, so blind to?
I think that they are trapped by their own traditions.
Just being Jewish.
The way that they've been trained to think about. When this person finally comes along, they're looking, they've got a certain mental picture of them that's been trained into them, and
Right.
that's what they're expecting, and they're processing it from that vantage point. And of course, not within that realm of possibility is a crucified Messiah.
Right.
So that's their problem. They are captured by,
They still think he's like a mighty conqueror who's gonna deliver them from the Rome.
they're captured by 600 years, 800, let's call it 800 years of prophetic tradition.
Right.
And the way that they've been taught ever since Isaiah. This is all Isaiah. This whole
Right.
book is Isaiah. Isaiah was preached to the people in the, let's call it the 700s.
Mhm.
And then,
Yeah.
and everything's a matter of interpretation.
Mhm.
And so, the commoners, you don't interpret this yourself. That's why you have scribes and Pharisees. Scribes, doctors of the law.
Mhm.
They hand down what these prophets were getting at, what they meant. And so they had a certain way of looking at this stuff, and the people inherit that, and that's what's trained into them. Now they're trying to fit Jesus into that traditional, that way of thinking, and it doesn't compute.
Right.
Nothing seems to be computing. They know they're in the presence of something.
Right.
But it just doesn't seem to quite fit. And they won't get it. In the case of Peter, and I mean, as far as the Gentiles go, they're not going to get it until Acts 15. Over halfway through the book. Or let's call it Acts 10, with Peter's visit to Cornelius. But it starts with Pentecost chapter 2. Before at Pentecost chapter 2, everything is on hold. Everything is on hold. It's all a waiting game.
Mhm.
They don't know what they're waiting for. They're up in the upper room praying. Acts 1, the 120. I don't know what they're praying. But it's prophecy. They're, the inbreaking of what the prophets foretold. They're waiting for that. They know something's going to happen. And then there's the outpouring of the Spirit, Joel chapter 2, which is what Peter repeats in Acts chapter 2. Behold, in the last days I will pour forth my Spirit upon all flesh, and so on and so forth. And until that moment, there's no chance they were going to understand it.
Mhm.
So they're just there. That's why they're just there. Nobody learns anything from them. They're not out, taking little small groups where they're going to teach people some of Jesus' message. They don't understand Jesus' message. This is a chapter ago. Who then is this?
Right.
That even the winds and the sea obey him. We don't know who this is. We thought we know. He's the son of David. There's going to be a coronation when they get to Jerusalem. as he goes into Jerusalem, there's going to essentially be a coronation. They think that they are anointing a new king, but that's as close as they can come to getting to the truth of the matter. I mean, well, why would the Messiah? Really, the Messiah is going to go around, walk around Galilee, and sleep out on the mountain, and on the
Right.
hill, and touch dead bodies, and let women go to Pharisees' houses and let women touch him?
Mhm,
That what kind of a king is that? Like, no king would ever allow that to happen,
mhm.
and that's what the Pharisees are thinking too. The celebrity, I don't know, it's not in there.
You're right,
Here he gets laughed at
right.
in this last story. So,
Yeah.
his like I've said, his world, the boundaries around him are very porous. You have the three, Peter, James, and John. Interesting that he puts John first here. And I noticed that when I was reading it this last time. But anyway, yeah. Other places, I think almost everywhere else, isn't it Peter, James, and John?
You
Somebody,
just need before James. not-
yes. So, you have Peter, James, and John in the inner circle. And then outside of that, you have the rest of the disciples, the rest of the apostles. And then outside of that, you have this larger circle of disciples. Because there's gonna be 500 people that are gonna witness the resurrection of Jesus at one time.
Mhm.
There's the 120 that you're gonna see in the upper room. They never get named anywhere in here. In fact, male disciples, I don't know that there's a single one named outside of the 12. There are women. We saw that before. The Marys, we know those names. Susanna, we know those names.
Right.
But men, if you consider, well, there's Joseph of Arimathea. You can consider him a disciple, maybe. But anyways, you have this circle of disciples that's in the hundreds, and then you have the crowds, and these boundaries between these groups, up to the 12, are very porous. They're moving back and forth all the time. Disciples, people come in, they've had enough of it, they go back out again. This is happening all the time. He's showing conflict and division everywhere he goes. It's the line is there. You get on one side or the other, and there's these people that are hopping back and forth. And the days of that are going to be over pretty soon. Because it's going to get real tough to be a disciple.
1-6, you said?
Yeah, 1 through 6.
He called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all the demons. Healed diseases. He sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to perform healing. And he said to them, take nothing for your journey, neither a staff nor a bag, nor bread nor money, and do not even have 2 tunics apiece. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that city. And as far as those who do not receive you, as you go out from that city, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. Departing, they began going throughout the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everyone.
So there it is. They become extensions of his ministry. So we just saw it, right? That's what we've been watching Jesus do. He preaches the message of the kingdom, whatever that is. And while he's doing that, as he goes about, there's all this healing that's happening. And now he, in some sense, transfers that mission and capability, not capability, whatever word you want to use for that. Ministry, let's use that word, onto these 12. And off they go, and they're going to do exactly the same thing. And so again, the inbreaking of the kingdom, the gospel then has this there's two sides to it. There's the message of the kingdom, and then there's the manifestation of it through the miracles that the kingdom brings with it, that the messengers bring with them. And you see both sides of it in the ministry of Jesus and then in the ministry of the 12, which I think prefigures what's going to happen in Acts. When there's a lot of parallels, we'll get to them when we get there, but there's a lot of parallels between the work of Jesus here and then what you'll see from Peter eventually. Very, very similar, up to and including the resurrection of a little girl. But now they have a role to play, although we don't find out what they did. They're still in Galilee. They're called the 12 again. They're an identifiable group in Jesus' mind and in Luke's mind.
Do you think this is different than the sending out the 70?
Yeah.
It's two separate.
Yeah.
Does Luke talk about the sending out?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's in here, right? Had I known you were gonna ask me that question, I would have looked it up.
Should have warned
So I
you
could,
ahead of
so I
time,
could,
Gary.
so I could sound like I know everything.
72, sends out 72 trucks then.
Is it in 10? Okay. There you are. Yeah, so there's all of a sudden, there's 58 more disciples. Or 60, whatever. Never get a name. We don't know anything about them. One of them is probably Mark.
Really?
Why not? I mean, he's around. He's gonna write a gospel. He's gonna be participant in the events, I believe. If you think he's the young man who left his coat behind and fled naked
I've never heard that.
at the arrest, which a lot of people do, I'm one of them.
So Mark is John Mark. isn't he?
Yeah, he's fundamental. I mean, he's there. He is there right at the beginning, from the very beginning of Acts. He is there and he is intimate with those disciples. So it makes sense that he was a part of these events. Yeah. And how do you explain the stature of that book? That book became the became the bedrock of the whole synoptic tradition. Just like that. So the best explanation for that is he was very, very close to the events. The writer of that book was very close to the events. Okay, so healing, you got demonic activity and disease, which are very closely related in their minds. Demonic activity causes disease, so sometimes it's called a healing and sometimes it's called it'll be a casting out. And then I don't know, so that's that. Sent them to proclaim the kingdom of God, whatever that is, and to perform healing, which is a manifestation of the kingdom. And then there's this statement of judgment, right? It's funny, the arrival of the kingdom brings with it the moment of truth. And there's no neutral. There's no sitting in the middle. It's not a spectator sport. Nobody gets to just watch. There will come a day when you will go one way or the other. You have to take it. You either stand, it's out of context, but he was not with me is against me, and vice versa. And so these cities that these guys go visit, it's a mixed blessing, because they're not offering the people in the city the alternative of just politely declining. We're giving you the chance. Through us, you have the chance to participate in the inbreaking of the kingdom that the prophets foretold. Should you not take the opportunity, you are consigned to judgment. And so it's every bit a tour of judgment as it is a tour of the kingdom of God. Both it comes with the kingdom. It's harsh, very, very harsh. Because he has some really harsh business to settle with his own people. God does. And Jesus is the messenger and the conduit and the, what do you call it? The initiator of it, whatever you want to call that. And so, prophets, he's a prophet. Prophets bring warning and promise almost every time. And sometimes right next to each other. And that's the case here. The good news of the kingdom brings with it also shake off the dust of your feet and testimony against them if they don't welcome you. Welcome you. Anyone who does not receive you. So you either receive us or judgment, because he's going to ultimately judge his people massively. AD 70 when Jerusalem is destroyed. That's all I got for that, because now here it is. Now he's going to stop. We don't find out what happened. In fact, we never really do. And he's going to move back to another lingering loose end, John the Baptist and Herod. And he's going to head off in that direction for a while. And then he's gonna bring back in the disciples when they come back from this, whatever you want to call tour that they go on. So let's just move on to that.
Now,
Mhm.
what do you wanna do through
10.
9 or through 10?
Yeah, let's hook it up with their return, sure.
Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was happening, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the
Oops.
prophets of old had risen. Herod said, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to see him. On their return, the apostles told him all that they had done, and he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida.
So Herod becomes a conduit for the heightened anticipation and dread, in a sense, of who, it's the lingering question that continues on. Who is this person? So at the highest levels now, Herod the Tetrarch, I created a little schema of the family. So these are the Herods. What's that? I don't know. It's a good question. Whoops. Slideshow. Whoops. That's not what I wanted. Sorry. You'd think after doing this so many times in front of churches, I'd know how to run the slideshow. Thank you. Now this thing has come back.
We can't see that.
So this is fascinating stuff. So Herod the Great was a great politician who managed to ingratiate himself with Caesar Augustus. So he's the Herod, the one that was there when Jesus died. I'm sorry, when Jesus was born. And he had these 4 sons. And when he died, his kingdom, if you want to call it that, was split up. The Romans decided Herod does not decide. He doesn't leave in his will. This is what I want to have happen. It goes back to the Romans to decide the disposition of the territories that Herod controlled. It's their vassal kings. And so Galilee was given to one of his sons, Antipas. And that's the Herod that you're seeing in Luke the whole time. And then you're going to see at the end of the book as well. And then Philip is his brother, who was the one in the story who had the ex-wife that Herod Antipas is going to marry, Herodias. Archelaus was another one. He had some territories on the other side of the Jordan or something. I don't know. He's mentioned in Matthew 2. And I think Aristobulus, did he get executed? I thought he was the son that got executed, but probably not before he had Agrippa the First, who was going to be, those 2 Agrippas are going to figure prominently in Acts. Agrippa the First is the one who murdered James, the apostle, and it was going to have Peter murdered, and then the angel shows up, and that story, that's Agrippa the First, which is also, the story is also told by Josephus, the famous 1st century Jewish historian. Very similar stories with a slightly different take on why. It makes for, maybe we'll do that when we get to Acts. And then Agrippa the Second is the one that Paul gives his testimony to at the end of Acts. So Antipas is the one that we are concerned with here, and you can see all the passages in Luke that reference him from beginning to end, really.
So he's the one who Jesus gets sent to.
Mhm.
At the end of the book.
Mhm. Yeah.
He kind of laughs at him and sends it back.
Ooh, yeah, so here it says, so we're kind of done with that. We're kind of done with that, this part of it. Here it says, he wants to, who is this man about whom I hear such? They kept trying to see him. Chapter 9. And then later in this I think it's later in this chapter, I haven't got there yet, is it? Maybe it's the next chapter. Jesus is going to find out that Herod is trying to kill him. That's how you dealt with problems like Jesus or John. You know, it's a everybody, I mean, at those levels, everybody is always on the lookout. You know, I have this saying about, like, among the emperors, it's murder or be murdered. So Herod the Great murdered his wife, Marian, can't remember how to say it. Sons, mother-in-law, why not? You know, you just murder them all because they're gonna try to get the throne from you, and then you don't have to worry. You just murder them, then, you know. Then-
Everyone's
Huh?
everyone's terrified of you too, if you're willing to kill all those people.
Yeah, that was a famous Stalinist tactic. Just do that and then keep everybody on edge all the time. But anyway, so he's gonna hear, he kept trying to see him. And it prefigures that at the end of the book, he gets to see him, but Jesus won't do any miracles. So he just sends him back to Pilate. But that's the bookends of Herod, in a sense. He kept trying to see him, he gets to see him, just wanted to see the miracles, and Jesus wouldn't do it. So he pops back in in the middle of the story about the sending out of the apostles. That's almost 5 minutes. He pops back into the story. Some more stuff on here. What do I write out here? No more. Pretty much told you everything. Yeah, I told you everything I don't want to say about it. I really got into this stuff when I started teaching Luke. Yeah, I started watching documentaries and reading books, New Testament history. There's F.F. Bruce's book, New Testament History, is excellent. He does a really good job of outlining all this stuff. So if you're into that sort of thing, which I am, and it's almost like a commentary on Acts as well. All right, so here's where we find out that John, isn't this where we find out that John was executed? He was in prison in chapter 4.
Verse 9, John I beheaded.
Yeah, but back in chapter 7, did I say 4? How do I say that? Chapter 7, he was just simply in prison, I think. We don't really hear, because Luke does that a lot too. He leaves the story open and then he cleans it up sometime later. We don't get the story about the dancing daughter in Luke. None of that stuff's in there. But that's interesting stuff too. There's a lot of that is really interesting because he had the intrigue here. There was a Aretas, a Nabatean king. Was it this guy that married? Yeah. He married. I should go back and look at this. I will, but Aretas IV was a Nabatean king to the southeast of Israel, or east southeast, and they give their daughters and stuff in marriage for these trees. And so he gave his daughter, I think, to him, Antipas, who then decided that he wanted to marry Herodias, Philip's ex-wife, his brother's ex-wife. And so he was going to send that daughter of Aretas back, and she fled for her life, and it started a little war or something like that, which you don't read about here. I got to go back and look at the details, but it's just such a mess as they tangle themselves up in these marriage treaties and untangle, and it just depends on what they want at the moment. It's just really, really weird because polygamy they didn't really do that here now at this time. So it's not like he's got 5 wives out there. That's right. Of course, Philip's mother isn't his mother necessarily. Or maybe it is, I don't remember. It's tough to keep up. The names just come and go. It's really tough to keep up with all. I really like it. So I'll read it every once in a while just to keep up with it. All right, let's finish this up. So that's it. He comes back in, the story gets told so that, as far as I can tell, Herod, at the highest levels now, Herod can ask, who is this? The disciples asked, who is this? Everybody's asking, who is this? The crowds are saying, and they're in anticipation, who is this? And now Herod appears on the scene. Who is this? Because, I had John beheaded. So who is this? Is this John resurrected again? Nobody knows who he is. The narrator, Luke, doesn't answer the question. Although with the evidence, remember, that's probably important now that I think about it. He had already told John, John sent the messengers. John is going, who is this? Are you the expected one, or should we look for another? And rather than tell them who he is, he just takes them with him as he does exactly this, preaches the message of the kingdom and just scatters miracles everywhere he goes. Says, go back and tell John what you see. And the parallels with Isaiah's festival of salvation Isaiah chapter 61 is all over it. And you have your answer. So it continues. Now Herod sees this stuff. Well, who is this? You know, and the anticipation continues as the narrative unfolds further and further. And then the disciples come back to no fanfare whatsoever. It's just they returned, they gave an account of him of what they had done. We don't know what they did, not in this book. You know, we do find out a little bit in others, but and then they withdrew to a city called Bethsaida, which he will pronounce a woe against in chapter 10, which was the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and one more of them, Philip. That's their hometown. So he had a lot to say to these Galilean cities that, it appears, rejected him. He's not free. All right, that's it. That's enough for today. Okay, we're done. And I'm gonna shut it down.
Oh, long chat.
It is a long chapter, yeah. It's the chapter where he sets his face to go to Jerusalem, which looks exactly like when he hadn't yet set his face to go to Jerusalem.
So it's Peter, Andrew, and Philip.
Peter, Andrew, and Philip, yes. So Peter and Andrew are brothers. James and John are brothers. And maybe Philip and Bartholomew are brothers? I don't remember.
Did you get that text I sent you with the graphic of Luke versus
You sent me a text?
Go?
Really? Well, I'll go ahead and shut down the feed. Nobody needs to see or hear this part.
If you already know.